Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your source material, all that reading, and really distill it down to the most potent, the most actionable insights. We give you that shortcut to being genuinely informed. And the mission today, well, it's critical, I think, and honestly, it's fascinating. We are diving deep into this whole concept of financial waste, but more than that, how we can actually make a shift, maybe even a radical one, from just, unconscious, mindless consumption towards something more robust, towards intentional living. And look, this isn't just about crunching numbers on a spreadsheet or setting up a budget app. This deep dive is really about applied self-mastery. It's kind of where behavioral finance meets, well, practical Stoic philosophy, really aiming right at your impulse control. Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources, they've laid out this remarkably clear, really pragmatic framework. It doesn't just say save more money. No, it asks you to understand why you spend it in the first place. So this framework, it gives us a really precise definition of financial waste. And then it offers 10 specific actionable steps.
Some are, pretty mechanical, practical things you can do tomorrow. Others are, well, deeply philosophical about mastering that fundamental, relentless human urge we all have to perpetually acquire more stuff.
Yeah, what's immediately fascinating here, I think, is how the source material just reframes the whole discussion. It moves the goalposts way beyond simple economics, It grounds this conversation squarely in personal psychology. The core idea, the thesis, is basically this. True, lasting wealth, and maybe even contentment, it doesn't just stem from acquiring things or even from being a skillful saver. Fundamentally, it comes from mastering the desire to acquire.
Ah, okay. So it's the wanting, not just the having.
Exactly. Because if we don't get a handle on that impulse, that internal craving, then honestly, no budget, no matter how strict you make it, is ever going to hold up. Not against the constant pressure of, consumer culture we're all swimming in.
That distinction feels really important. It suggests financial freedom is maybe an internal victory before it shows up on your bank statement.
That's precisely it. So we have to start with the necessary first step, which is diagnosis. If you're serious about increasing your savings, or maybe just feeling more in control of your financial life, you first absolutely have to know what kind of waste you're generating.
Right. You can't fix what you don't understand.
Exactly. Until we define the enemy, so to speak, we're just fighting in the dark. Getting that clear distinction, that's the essential diagnosis. Only then can we prescribe a remedy that actually sticks.
Okay, let's jump right into that diagnosis then. Because the sources, they give us this brilliant, almost deceptively simple way to categorize our financial slip-ups. They break waste down into two crucial categories. Understanding the difference here really helps focus our efforts.
Yeah.
So first up, we have what the sources call pure waste. Now, conceptually, this one's maybe the easiest category to get your head around because, well, it's the most indefensible, really. We're talking about the things you acquire, goods, subscriptions, services, whatever, and then you simply never use them. Or maybe you use them so infrequently that the cost just completely dwarfs any utility you got out of it.
It's basically money just vanishing into thin air. Poof. It offers zero return on investment. Zilch. Which is why it gets that kind of harsh label, pure waste. And the sources are just full of these really relatable examples, right? Specific things that resonate because, let's be honest, nearly everyone has this type of purchase lurking somewhere in their past or maybe in their closet right now.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there. I mean, we need to talk about those dusty kitchen gadgets, right? The ones that were supposed to revolutionize your morning smoothie routine, or maybe that fancy stand mixer you just had to have.
Yeah.
But now they just sit there on a shelf, maybe still in the box, or maybe used once, meticulously cleaned, and then abandoned.
And the sources make a brilliant point about the grocery aspect of pure waste, too. That specific detail, it's so memorable. Buying fresh stuff like, really good hummus, a bag of organic baby carrots, maybe that fancy artisanal sourdough bread.
Right. You buy it with the absolute best intentions. Healthy snacking, disciplined home cooking. This is the week.
Exactly. But then life happens and they spoil in the fridge before you even open them. That's not just money wasted on the purchase itself. It's money literally being scraped into the bin. It represents that completely unconscious, maybe aspirational financial behavior.
That aspirational gap you mentioned, that feels key, doesn't it? It's like the person who buys the expensive hobby kit, say, knitting supplies on Tuesday. That's the aspirational self. Full of energy, future plans, picturing all the lovely scarves they'll make.
Right.
But the person who finds the moldy hummus on Friday, that's the actual self. The one who is too tired, too busy, too whatever, to actually follow through on Tuesday's grand vision.
Precisely. Pure waste is like this profound mirror just reflecting that chasm right back at you. It's the gap between the person you intend to be and the person you actually are when you're faced with the friction and exhaustion of daily life. And we really need to expand this idea of pure waste beyond just physical stuff. Think about digital pure waste. That annual subscription to some specialized software you downloaded once and never opened again.
Oh, yeah. Been there.
Or that online course you dropped $300 on, full of enthusiasm, and maybe you only completed the intro module. Or the premium cloud storage plan you pay for every month, but you've never even come close to filling.
Guilty as charged on probably all of those at some point.
Right. All of those represent money spent on an intention that was just never executed. It provided zero utility. So the exercise is, if you track an expense and realize you never broke the seal, whether that's digital or physical, that right there is pure waste.
Okay, that's pure waste. Clear, if sometimes a little painful to admit. Now, the second category, this is where it gets, much more psychologically complex, I think.
Yeah.
And that's excessive waste.
Yeah, this one's far more subtle. It's not really about buying things you don't need at all. I mean, we all need some enjoyment, some non-essential things in life. It's about overdoing a specific habit, taking something potentially good and doing it so much that the activity or the product, it just loses its value. Or maybe it crosses some kind of personal threshold of utility.
So it's not don't buy coffee, it's maybe don't buy 7 coffees a day.
Exactly. And this requires a really critical distinction. It directly addresses that fear some listeners might have right now, thinking, oh, great, they're just going to tell me to live like a monk.
Right, deprivation is not the goal here.
No, absolutely not. The framework is really explicit about this. The goal isn't austerity, it's not deprivation, it's moderation, it's optimization. Excessive waste happens when the marginal utility, the extra benefit you get from one more unit drops effectively to zero. Or maybe it even becomes negative, causing clutter or stress. Let's use eating out as the main example because the sources do. If you love a great meal out, okay, the first or maybe the second restaurant visit of the week, probably highly enjoyable, provides significant value, convenience, flavor, social connection, whatever.
Sure, it's a treat.
But if you find yourself eating out every single day, maybe even twice a day, that 10th purchased meal of the week, well, it's providing rapidly diminishing returns, isn't it? It stops being a valued experience and just becomes mundane, an automatic expectation. Or maybe just a symptom that you're too exhausted to cook.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about something like clothes? I mean, one new shirt might genuinely fill a need, maybe make you feel good, boost your confidence for an interview or something.
Sure.
But the source material suggests that, say, purchasing 10 new shirts in a single month, that probably just clutters up your closet, makes laundry more complicated, and actually dilutes the initial joy you got from that very first purchase. So where's the line? How do we figure out when enjoyment tips over into wasteful excess?
And that is the core insight that defines this category. Sustainable change, the kind that actually lasts. It relies on finding a balance, not total elimination. If you genuinely love eating out or buying clothes or whatever your thing is, the solution isn't usually to just stop entirely. That's restriction, and it's often unsustainable.
Because you just rebound later, right?
Often, yeah. The real solution is to identify your personal satiation point. That's the point where the marginal utility, the extra benefit, stops providing a significant positive return for you, and then you commit to staying beneath that point. When you buy excessively, that excess consumption actually drains the value right out of the habit itself. It leads to clutter, maybe debt, definitely financial anxiety.
Okay, so we've got our 2 targets defined. Pure waste, that's the unused stuff bought by the hopeful aspirational self.
Yeah.
And excessive waste, that's the overdone habits that have kind of lost their shine. Now, how do we, the listener, actually spot these things in our own lives? Because life is complex, it's busy. The recommendation here seems pretty clear, almost non-negotiable, really. It starts with diligent tracking of expenses and, maybe even more importantly, honest reflection on those purchases, without judgment, just tracking and reflecting.
Absolutely. Tracking isn't just, an accounting exercise. It's not just for accountants. It is the absolute foundation of self-awareness when it comes to finance. Without that quantifiable data, that hard evidence, everything just stays this vague, anxious feeling like, oh, I really should be saving more, or gosh, I think I probably spend too much on coffee.
Right, it's all just guesswork and guilt.
Exactly. But when we systematically put the actual numbers down, maybe on paper, maybe in an app, the undeniable patterns emerge. Where your money truly flows becomes crystal clear, sometimes shockingly so.
Okay, but let me push back just a little bit on the tracking requirement. Because I think a lot of listeners, maybe most of us, hear tracking and we immediately picture this complicated, time-sucking spreadsheet. It feels like adding another layer of mental burden to an already packed schedule.
That's fair.
I mean, if someone feels too tired to cook, which, as you said, is often the root cause of excessive takeout spending, isn't demanding diligent tracking just adding another chore they're likely to fail at? Are there specific, maybe lower-effort tracking methods the sources talk about?
That's an excellent point, and a really practical one. The sources definitely stress that the method matters much less than the consistency. If a full-blown budget feels overwhelming right now, don't start there. Start with a highly targeted track. So for pure waste, the exercise can be pretty straightforward. You don't need fancy software. Just literally review your bank or credit card statements for the last month or two, and just flag items, specifically flag items that were purchased but, deep down were never touched.
Just be honest with yourself.
Be honest. You don't need a perfect category breakdown for everything. You just need to identify the ghosts of those failed intentions. The hobby stuff still in the bag, the forgotten subscription still auto-renewing, the appliance still sitting in the box. This exercise, even if you only do it once, immediately shows you where your money flows based on aspiration rather than your actual reality.
Okay, that feels more manageable. Just identify the never-used stuff. And what about spotting excessive waste? How does tracking help there if the item was just too much?
Right. For excessive waste, the tracking analysis shifts. It moves away from utility, did I use it, and focuses squarely on frequency. You analyze your spending habits specifically to recognize those patterns of just overdoing it. So if you look at your statement and you see 7 charges at the same coffee shop in just 5 days, or maybe 4 different restaurant charges in 6 days, that frequency itself is the data point that helps define the excess.
It forces you to confront the pattern.
It demands that rational reckoning, yeah. The data forces you to ask the hard questions. Is my quality of life truly 4 times better this week because I ate takeout 4 times? Or have I simply outsourced my cooking because of inertia or decision fatigue after work? The frequency analysis is absolutely critical because it maps out those automatic, almost unconscious behaviors. Most of these excessive habits, whether it's scrolling and clicking buy now late at night, or those daily expensive lunches, they're often designed unconsciously to soothe stress or avoid boredom, or just compensate for a lack of planning. Tracking provides the raw, impartial data. It shows you, the consumer, that the temporary soothing is probably costing you far more than the temporary relief is actually worth.
Okay, so tracking is the mirror. It shows us the habits. Now, once we've pinpointed a specific mindless or wasteful habit, let's say pure waste in the form of spoiled groceries, or maybe excessive waste like that constant takeout habit, the material really stresses that the critical next step is asking that foundational question, why? This seems to be the psychological pivot point. The moment we move from that place of, painful, unsustainable, guilt-driven restriction, I shouldn't do this, to a place of more rational self-discipline, and, importantly, structural change.
This is the absolute key difference. It's what separates a failed budget, which often feels just restrictive and punitive, from achieving sustainable financial freedom, which has to be proactive. Most people, when they try to cut spending, they rely on sheer willpower, right? Okay, today I will not buy lunch.
And then they feel terrible when they inevitably fail by Wednesday.
Exactly. They feel guilt, they feel shame, and often they rebound, maybe even spending more later, stuck in this awful cycle of shame and self-sabotage. The sources argue really forcefully that we have to move beyond that model of moral failing. It's not about being weak. It's often about having a poor system.
So instead of just blaming ourselves, we need to dig deeper. We have to find the root cause, the actual driver behind the unwanted behavior, and then, crucially, implement a structural, proactive solution, something that either removes the choice point altogether or makes the desired behavior, like cooking at home, incredibly easy.
That definition is true discipline, I think. It's about anticipating your own inevitable moments of weakness when you're tired, stressed, hungry, and building a system around yourself that makes success almost automatic, or at least much more likely.
Let's really dig into the examples from the source material here, because we need some detailed, expanded illustrations to make this concept really concrete for the listener.
Okay, good idea.
So the first example we kind of touched on already. Problem: eating out way too much. That's the excessive waste. Now, most people stop right there feeling guilty. I spend too much in restaurants. But when you push yourself to ask why, you often uncover the root cause, and frequently it's something like, I'm just too tired or too rushed or mentally depleted to even think about cooking when I get home from a long day.
A very common scenario.
So if that tiredness is the real issue, then the purely restrictive solution, just telling yourself don't eat out, is almost doomed to fail, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's fighting against your actual physical and
Yeah.
mental reality at 6 p.m.
Exactly. You're trying to use willpower against genuine exhaustion, and willpower is finite. So the structural, proactive solution the sources suggest is something like batch cook 4 or 5 simple meals on Sunday. Pack them up. Have them ready in the fridge or freezer. Now, when you get home tired on Wednesday, you don't have to fight the feeling of tiredness. You've eliminated the need for a complex decision, what should I cook, or significant effort, I have to chop all these vegetables, right when you're mentally at your lowest point. You've successfully solved the core behavioral weakness, the vulnerability to take out when tired with planning and structure.
That completely shifts the burden, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It moves it from relying on in-the-moment willpower to relying on weekend preparation. But how does the source material suggest maintaining that preparation habit? Because, let's face it, sometimes even finding the energy to batch cook on Sunday feels like a huge hurdle.
That's where the concept of pre-commitment comes in, which is powerful. You commit to the batch cooking even when you don't necessarily feel like it because you recognize the immense payoff later in the week. The payoff is eliminating that high-friction, high-cost decision point, the should I order pizza debate. Think of it as an investment in your future, less energetic self. You're doing a favor for the Wednesday evening, you who will be incredibly grateful for that ready-made meal. It takes discipline up front, but it conserves much more mental energy later.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's explore another set of examples, maybe related more to pure waste this time. Let's say the problem is consistently overspending on groceries, which often leads to food spoiling before it gets used.
Right, the Watton hummus scenario again.
What's the root cause there? Often it's a lack of a well-stocked pantry with staples, maybe no clear meal plan for the week, or maybe just going to the grocery store too frequently, like stopping in every day after work, which just increases exposure to impulse buys and tempting displays.
All very common root causes. And the solution here is similarly structural, not based on willpower in the aisle. The sources recommend implementing a detailed pantry inventory system, know what you actually have, and creating a rigorous, dedicated shopping list before you even think about going to the store. And don't just make a list. Commit to the discipline of the list. See the list as the externalization of your rational, planned self. The inventory tells you what you truly need, preventing those redundant purchases that just sit there and eventually become pure waste. And the list itself prevents those emotional, impulsive choices that happen when you're looking at the beautifully stacked cookies or the special offer on something you don't actually need.
Stick to the list like glue.
Stick to the list.
Okay, what about purchases driven more by social factors? Like the problem of constantly feeling the need to buy new gadgets, or the latest fashion, or keep up with trends. The root cause there might be feeling social pressure, trying to keep up with the Joneses, or maybe seeking validation through visible status items.
Yeah, that's a powerful driver. And this one often requires more of a psychological solution than a purely logistical one. The sources suggest that if the why is really about status or external validation, the solution isn't simply trying to abstain through willpower, I won't buy new clothes. That rarely works long term if the underlying need isn't addressed. Instead, it's about consciously deciding to shift your validation metric. Find other ways to feel good about yourself or measure your progress. This could mean investing in or prioritizing non-visible forms of personal wealth or skill, things like taking a professional development course, aggressively paying down high-interest debt, which brings huge peace of mind, or deliberately choosing to invest in experiences like travel or learning a new skill, rather than just accumulating more objects.
So you're replacing that shallow external validation from buying stuff with a deeper internal sense of security, competence, or fulfillment. You're basically redefining what keeping up or being successful means to you personally, outside of just consumer markers.
Precisely. It's taking control of your own value system.
Okay, one more critical one, especially relevant today. Problem. Those late-night online shopping sprees may be fueled by scrolling social media that often result in pure waste purchases you barely remember ordering when they arrive.
Oh, the dopamine-fueled click fests, yes.
What's the root cause there? Often it's simply stress or anxiety or maybe boredom or just the need for a quick hit of dopamine to kind of regulate your mood after a difficult day or a boring evening.
This is absolutely critical in the digital age, where shopping is always just a click away, 200-4/7. The solution here, the sources argue, has to be substitution. You need to consciously replace the shopping impulse with a readily available, non-transactional coping mechanism. So instead of reflexively opening that shopping app when stress hits, the disciplined plan, the structural solution might be When I feel that urge, I commit to a 20-minute walk outside. Or I engage in a free, absorbing hobby I enjoy, like reading a book, listening to a podcast, maybe playing an instrument.
You're essentially retraining your brain's reward pathways,
Yeah.
teaching it to seek regulation and comfort outside of commerce.
Exactly. By solving the underlying operational failures, like not having food ready when tired, and the emotional triggers, like stress or boredom, with proactive, non-spending solutions, you effectively eliminate the need for constant, exhausting willpower.
That really does transform the entire process, doesn't
Yeah.
it? You're not just restricting yourself anymore. You're actively managing your environment, your schedule, and your internal state to optimize for the outcomes you actually want. You've diagnosed the failure by finding the why, but okay, diagnosis alone is passive. It's just information.
Right.
To move from just understanding to actual discipline, we need to build active external barriers. Which takes us perfectly into part 2 of this framework, where we look at setting these specific self-imposed rules that act like permanent guardrails against desire.
Okay, so we've established why finding the root cause is so crucial and why structural solutions beat willpower alone. But how do we actually, codify this discipline? How do we make it concrete? This is where the sources move from the diagnostic phase we just covered into the more prescriptive phase. And it starts with the absolute necessity of setting clear, self-imposed, ideally unbreakable rules.
Unbreakable sounds intense.
Well, maybe firm is a better word. The source material uses this interesting phrasing, suggesting we must become the legislator of our own behavior, like setting personal laws for yourself.
I like that. Legislator of my own behavior.
Yeah. It means establishing these personal, maybe inviolable is too strong, but certainly firm laws that act as robust guardrails against temptation. And the tremendous psychological benefit here is that these rules, if you stick to them, they fundamentally remove the need for those daily exhausting battles of willpower.
Ah, okay. This connects directly back to what you said about willpower being finite, right?
Right.
You only have so much mental energy for making good decisions each day. And when we constantly have to debate with ourselves, should I order food tonight? Should buy that thing I saw online? Maybe. We just deplete that capacity, which makes us much more likely to give in to temptation later in the day when we're tired.
Exactly. These self-imposed rules, they preempt that whole debate. They are a form of pre-commitment. Think about it. A goal is kind of vague, like, I want to save more money. Okay, great. But a rule is binary. It's, I do not do X, or I only do Y under these specific conditions. So, when temptation inevitably arrives, and you don't have to engage in that draining internal negotiation. The decision is already made. It's enshrined in your personal constitution, so to speak. Temptation just hits this solid pre-built wall instead of relying on your current mood or your fluctuating energy level to resist it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's look at some of the specific rules the sources provided, because they're really simple, but they seem highly effective as examples of this self-legislation idea.
Yeah, they're very practical. We saw one, never eat out more than once a day. Simple, clear. This immediately puts a hard stop on that high-cost, high-frequency pattern of maybe grabbing lunch out and getting dinner delivered on the same day.
Right, doubles your spending right there.
Easily. Another one was never eat out 2 days in a row. This rule is specifically designed to prevent that slippery slope effect. You know how one indulgence on Tuesday can easily turn into, oh, well, I already did it yesterday, might as well do it again today, which then quickly morphs into a week-long pattern before you know it. This rule breaks that momentum.
Okay, I can see how that works. And the rule targeting digital habits. Only shop online on weekends. I think this is a really powerful example of protecting ourselves during those weaker moments, protecting that actual self we talked about.
Absolutely. That rule specifically targets the kind of mindless impulse spending that tends to happen late at night, often driven by boredom, stress, or just endless scrolling on your phone or tablet. We know that late-night digital browsing is a huge driver of pure waste, buying stuff you don't need or even really want. So if you see something advertised at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night and you feel that urge, the rule dictates a simple, automatic process. Fine, put it on a designated list, maybe a specific browser tab group or a note, but you must wait until Saturday morning to even consider purchasing it. You don't have to actively decide to be disciplined in that tempting moment. The self-imposed law forces the necessary waiting period.
It takes the decision out of your tired Tuesday night hands.
Precisely. What other kinds of self-legislation do the sources propose, maybe for physical possessions or clutter?
Well, the sources also suggest rules that help manage your physical inventory, which directly combats the clutter that often comes along with pure waste. A classic example is the one-in, one-out rule applied to specific categories like clothes, books, or maybe even tools.
How does that work specifically?
The rule is, if you buy a new item in that category, say, a new sweater, then an existing item from that same category, an old sweater, must be removed. Donated, sold, given away, whatever. But it has to go out.
Ah, okay. So this rule doesn't actually restrict the act of buying itself, but it tightly restricts the net volume of acquisition. It forces you to have a moment of rational judgment right before you buy. Is this new thing truly worth sacrificing something I already own and presumably use or value?
Exactly. It introduces friction and consequence right at the point of purchase, forcing you to consider the total cost, not just the price tag.
So the core function of all these rules, really, is to create mandatory friction points where our modern consumer culture tries its absolute hardest to eliminate friction entirely. Think one-click buying, saved payment info, curated feeds.
Yeah, they make it too easy.
They make it frictionless. So by setting these personal boundaries, by becoming the legislator of your own behavior, you insulate your day-to-day self. You protect yourself from the exhausting demands of constant decision-making in a world designed to make you consume constantly.
Okay, so we've got these hard rules, these binary do or don't laws, but then the sources move into something a bit more nuanced, right? Into setting limits, even on things we enjoy. This feels like it connects more to that excessive waste category.
Yes, exactly. This moves us into a slightly deeper philosophical area, applying principles of Stoic restraint to everyday life. The sources emphasize that moving beyond just strict rules, even activities that are genuinely enjoyable and add value to our lives, require clear boundaries. Why? To prevent them from slowly, insidiously sliding into excessive waste, or just losing their savor because of what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, basically, getting used to things.
That's a critical point for applying ancient wisdom today, isn't it? I mean, Stoicism teaches, in part, that external things themselves are indifferent, neither good nor bad. The distress or problem comes from our judgment about them, our attachment to them.
Precisely.
So in a modern consumer context, maybe the fancy coffee itself isn't the problem, but our attachment to having it unlimited times in excessive quantities, that's where the trouble starts.
That's exactly the connection. We're trying to achieve mastery over our internal reactions, our desires, not necessarily over the external marketplace itself. So these limits, they're designed as a proactive tool. They prevent that slide into excess, which, as we defined it, is the very definition of excessive waste. And here's the interesting paradox the sources highlight. By setting a hard limit on something enjoyable, we paradoxically preserve and sometimes even increase our appreciation for that item or activity when we do allow ourselves to have it. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, perhaps, but also limits increase perceived value.
Okay, so if the goal isn't total deprivation, but regaining control, and maybe even enhancing enjoyment through scarcity, what are some specific examples the sources give for setting these kinds of limits?
The key is that the limits must be clearly quantified and usually time-bound. Vague intentions don't work here either. So examples might be, eat out no more than 3 times per week. That's a clear number within a clear time frame. Or limit clothing purchases to a maximum of $100 per month. Again, a specific, measurable boundary.
Why does setting a hard number like that, $100 for clothes, tend to work better than a vaguer resolution like, okay, I'll try to spend less on clothes this month?
It works because it defines success and failure unequivocally. It removes ambiguity, which is crucial for overcoming self-deception. If your clothing limit is $100 and you spend $99, you succeeded. Boom, you feel a sense of accomplishment, of being in control.
Yeah, clear feedback.
Exactly. If you spend $101, you've clearly broken the rule, which immediately prompts that important why analysis we talked about. Why did I go over? What triggered that? Vague resolutions like spend less allow you to constantly move the goalposts. Oh, well, I only bought 2 things. That's less than last month. A hard limit forces you to exercise constraint before the transaction happens. It forces prioritization. If you only have $100 allocated, you're naturally pushed towards choosing quality over sheer quantity, which directly combats that tendency towards excessive waste, accumulating lots of cheap, unsatisfying stuff.
That concept really forces intentionality, doesn't it? It makes you focus on that satiation point we discussed earlier. You have to ask yourself, okay, with this limited budget or frequency, where will I get the most value? Where does the enjoyment stop increasing significantly? Where does the next purchase just become noise or clutter?
And the pursuit of contentment, as the Stoics might say, is often more a function of appreciation than sheer acquisition. When you deliberately severely limit the quantity of certain goods or experiences, you are forced to be utterly deliberate about the value and the quality of the purchases you do choose to make. If you're only eating out, say, 3 times a week, you're probably going to make sure those 3 meals are pretty good, right? You'll choose places you really enjoy, you'll savor the experience more because it's not just an everyday occurrence. This practice helps restore freedom from impulse. It helps defeat that hedonic treadmill, that human tendency to need more and more stimulation just to maintain the same baseline level of satisfaction.
So the pre-commitment to these specific quantified limits acts as a powerful weapon against that treadmill effect.
It really does.
Okay, rules, limits.
Yeah.
Now this next one feels incredibly practical, maybe the most directly actionable tactic we've discussed so far. The sources offer this specific, almost universally applicable technique against the modern impulse buying machine. It's about transforming patience from a passive virtue into an active, offensive tool, the 48-hour rule.
Yes, this one is pure behavioral economics in action. It's simple, but surprisingly powerful.
So the mechanism, as described, is elegantly simple. When you feel tempted by any non-essential purchase, something you don't immediately need for survival or core function, you must force yourself to wait a full 48 hours, 2 entire days, before you are allowed to actually click buy or hand over your cart.
And this rule acts as a direct behavioral countermeasure to that instant gratification cycle that basically all of modern retail, especially digital retail, relies on so heavily. We have to understand the underlying psychology here. Impulse buying is largely driven by that immediate temporary rush of dopamine in the brain.
You shiny effect.
Exactly. Often triggered by things like artificial urgency, sale ends tonight, or scarcity alerts, only 2 left in stock, or maybe personalized recommendations that feel perfect in the moment. This emotional excitement, that feeling of I must have this now, it's actually extremely fleeting. Research shows it usually peaks within the first few hours, maybe even minutes of exposure.
Okay, so the 48-hour rule basically weaponizes patience.
Wow.
It deliberately introduces mandatory non-negotiable friction back into a transaction process that's designed to be utterly frictionless.
Correct. We are forcing a necessary neurological shift to happen. Impulse decisions often tend to bypass the more rational part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and consequence assessment. They get governed more by the limbic system, our emotion and survival center. By forcing that 48-hour delay, we essentially allow the initial emotional storm, that urgency, to naturally dissipate. We give the prefrontal cortex time to come back online, to engage, to ask rational questions. Do I really need this? Where will I put it? What else could I use this money for? Is it truly worth it? By the time 48 hours have passed, that initial emotional urgency has almost always faded significantly. Reason has returned. And the sources claim, in a significant majority of cases, the desire itself just vanishes. Poof.
What about the common objection, though? What does the source material say about the fear of missing out, the FOMO, that retailers are so good at exploiting? Like, if I wait 48 hours, the deal might be gone. The item might sell out.
They address this head-on by essentially reframing the potential loss. The fear of missing out on a deal is countered by the realization that by not buying impulsively, you are protecting yourself from an almost guaranteed financial loss, the loss represented by pure waste if you didn't really need it, or excessive waste if it pushes you over your limit. The thinking is, if the item is truly essential, if it provides necessary lasting utility, it will almost always be available again, maybe at a slightly different price, maybe from a different vendor. If the desire for that item cannot survive a simple 48-hour cooling off period, it was almost certainly never a genuine need in the first place. It was just an impulse, an itch.
It really is the ultimate cooling off period for the consumer brain, isn't it? You experience the temptation, you maybe even put the item in the digital cart, you get that little rush from the idea of acquiring it, and then you are legally bound by your own self-legislation to just step away, walk away from the screen. And the sources point out something powerful. When you come back and look at that same item 48 hours later, and sometimes you can't even remember why you wanted it so badly, that clearly demonstrates the original desire wasn't really about the utility of the actual product. It was about the thrill of the chase, the dopamine hit, the process of potential acquisition itself.
And achieving that separation, separating the emotional urge from the actual transaction, that is the very essence of financial self-mastery. The 48-hour rule severely limits the opportunities for that pure dopamine-fueled spending that almost always results in pure waste or buyer's remorse later.
Wow.
It's a remarkably low-effort, high-impact tactical tool. It directly combats the constant sense of urgency the market tries to create. Honestly, if you, the listener, could implement and maintain just this one rule consistently, you would likely protect your finances significantly from your own most impulsive moments. And that might be the greatest financial guardrail of all.
Okay, so we've covered building the internal structures, the diagnosis, the rules, the limits, and now this powerful tactical use of patience with the 48-hour rule. Now, we need to shift focus slightly to the moment of action itself, the physical or digital act of shopping and consumption, and then finally to what the sources present as the ultimate philosophical antidote.
Right. We've built the internal defenses. Now let's talk about strategy for when you're actually on the battlefield, so to speak, in the store or on the website.
We've established the need for these strong internal boundaries. Now we look at how those principles get applied right in the specific moment we are arguably most vulnerable. The shopping environment itself, whether that's physical or digital. The sources offer two really concrete tactical steps for managing that environment. And then, yes, one final, quite profound philosophical antidote that kind of ties everything together.
And it starts with confronting a fundamental truth. Mindless spending is almost always born from mindless browsing. That act of just entering a store, physical or digital, with that vague intention of, oh, I'll just look around or just seeing what's new, that is basically the equivalent of opening your front door wide and inviting temptation and desire to just walk right in and take over your decision-making process.
That browsing behavior, that just looking mindset, is exactly what the entire retail environment is meticulously designed to maximize, isn't it? They want you to linger. They want you to wander the aisles, physically or digitally. They want you to be exposed to cross-selling, upselling, impulse items at the checkout, curated for you sections, all designed to make you feel like you might miss out on something wonderful hidden just around the next corner or just one more scroll down.
Absolutely. It's an environment engineered for impulse. So the sources outline a very different approach, a deliberate, almost surgical approach to procurement. And it begins with establishing absolute clarity of purpose before you engage.
So step one is purpose. Before you even enter a store or open a shopping app or browse a website, you must establish a clear, concise mission statement for that specific shopping trip. The example given in the sources was simple. I need pillows. Or maybe it's, I need to restock olive oil and toothpaste.
Yeah.
That is your sole mission, nothing else.
And the discipline required here, the sources stress, is intense. It means you must go directly to the pillow section or the grocery aisle with olive oil. You purchase only what is strictly needed for that mission. And then you leave the store or log off the website immediately. Done. Purpose silences desire, or at least muffles it significantly, because you don't allow your attention, your focus, to be captured by unrelated marketing messages, flashy display tactics, or those eerily accurate algorithmic suggestions that are designed purely to trigger a new impulse in you. You are there for a precise transaction, fulfilling a predefined need. You are operating as a resource manager, not as a recreational shopper seeking entertainment.
It really comes down to the proactive management of your attention, doesn't it? Which, in today's world, is maybe the consumer's most valuable and most targeted commodity.
Precisely. Think about it. Every end cap display in the supermarket, every banner ad, every buy three, get one free sign, every digital pop-up asking for your email for a discount. Every single one is designed with one goal: to divert you from your established purpose, to capture your attention and create a new desire. By adhering strictly to your mission, your predefined purpose, you create this kind of insulating shield around yourself, protecting your finite mental energy and your wallet from those intentional distractions.
Okay, purpose first, which leads us directly and logically to the second tactical step, the physical manifestation of that purpose, the humble but mighty list.
Yes, the list. Step 2 is lists. Whether it's for groceries, office supplies, hardware store items, whatever the list, especially a written or digital list that you commit to not deviating from, is described in the sources as a crucial tool. It's like a physical manifestation of your discipline, and it's incredibly effective against self-deception in the moment.
The list serves at least 3 vital functions, and it's worth detailing them. First, as we just discussed in relation to purpose, it prevents distraction. It keeps your eyes, your focus, trained only on the items that are prerequisites for achieving your established goals for that trip. You're not aimlessly scanning shelves, you're locating specific items. Second, and this is important, it curbs major impulse purchases. It makes them highly visible violations of your own system. It's much harder to rationalize buying, say, a new power tool or an expensive jacket when it is glaringly not on the list you carefully prepared beforehand. It forces a moment of accountability. Right, it breaks the spell of the impulse.
Yeah.
And the third function, which the sources stress is perhaps the most critical from a purely budgetary perspective, is that the list prevents that slow hemorrhage of small, unplanned purchases.
Yes, that slow hemorrhage analogy is perfect. It's insidious. These are all those little low-cost items, the pack of gum at the checkout, the novelty socks on display, the discounted candy bar strategically placed, maybe the $7 streaming movie rental you clicked on impulse. They feel completely insignificant on their own right. It's only a few bucks.
Yeah, easy to justify each one individually.
Very easy. However, because they are unplanned and often quite frequent, they collectively drain hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars from your finances every single year. It's death by 1,000 tiny cuts. The list acts as the financial tourniquet for that constant, low-level, often unexamined bleeding of funds. When you truly commit to buying only what is on the list, you ensure that every dollar leaving your account was spent deliberately, consciously, and accounted for in your plan.
Purpose and lists. Very tactical, very concrete. Now, this final step, this is where the sources really elevate the entire discussion. It moves beyond mere financial tactics right into the realm of existential well-being. It demands we ask that deeper, maybe most fundamental question of all. What is the underlying psychological drive that fuels so much of our consumption habits in the first place?
Right. This final step forces us to confront the reality that if the product itself, the thing we buy, isn't actually providing lasting happiness or fulfillment, and we know from tons of research that beyond a certain basic level, it generally doesn't, then we must be trying to fill some other kind of void, some emotional or psychological deficit. We're essentially attempting to use external transactions to solve internal problems.
So what is that internal problem? What's the deficit?
And the answer provided by the source material, which is actually supported by a lot of behavioral science research, is startlingly simple, quite profound, and yet often completely overlooked in personal finance discussions. The answer is boredom fuels consumption.
Boredom. Wow. Yep. That explanation resonates pretty deeply, actually. When you think about it, when people are idle or restless or just plain bored indoors, they reflexively start seeking out stimulus, engagement, something to do.
Exactly.
And in our modern society, the quickest, the easiest, and certainly the most heavily advertised solution to fill that psychological void, that feeling of emptiness or restlessness, is almost always the transactional one. It's retail therapy, it's scrolling online stores, it's engaging in paid forms of entertainment. Spending money becomes the default, almost unconscious solution to an underlying state of discontent or simple mental idleness.
We sometimes call this stimulus hunger. Humans seem to be wired to seek engagement, novelty, interaction. If you find yourself stuck inside, maybe sedentary, maybe just scrolling aimlessly, the commercial world has done an incredibly effective job of ensuring that the most readily accessible forms of stimulation almost always involve pulling out your wallet or entering your credit card number. The solution, therefore, if boredom is a major driver, must involve finding abundant, accessible, non-transactional forms of stimulation and engagement.
Okay, so what's the non-transactional solution?
The solution offered is equally simple in concept, but it definitely requires intentional effort. It is spend time outside.
Some time outside, that's it.
That's a core recommendation. Walk in nature. Go for a brisk jog around the block. Just breathe fresh air. Sit under some trees in a park and simply observe the world around you. Basically, intentionally exist for a period of time in any space that is fundamentally not a commercial environment designed to sell you something.
The implication there feels massive. This activity, walking, sitting in a park, it costs absolutely nothing, $0. Yet the argument is that it richly replaces that fulfillment deficit, that stimulus hunger, that spending is often used to merely mask or temporarily soothe.
Exactly. The source material argues that connecting with the natural world, the physical movement, the sensory input, sights, sounds, smells, the novelty of what you might see, even the inherent stillness, sometimes it restores a deep, perhaps primal sense of contentment and satisfaction. And that feeling, that connection, naturally detaches you from those gnawing consumer cravings far more effectively and certainly more sustainably than any restrictive budget ever could on its own.
It's like finding a free source of the very thing you were trying to buy.
In a way, yes. Nature provides stimulation, engagement for the senses, thoughts for the mind that is inherently non-transactional. It's non-competitive. You can be present, engaged, and feel fulfilled without needing to exchange currency. The simple, non-monetized activity of just taking a walk shifts your focus away from scarcity, what don't I have, and acquisition, what should I buy, towards abundance. Look at all this around me and experience. How does this feel? Furthermore, there's a social element too. When you're walking in a park or sitting by a river, the pressures of status consumption that need to buy things to impress others or signal your place in the hierarchy, they tend to completely dissolve, don't they?
Yeah, you realize that the $500 jacket or the expensive car suddenly loses almost all of its social signaling value when you're just, observing the sky or listening to the wind of the trees. No one cares out there.
It resets the whole value equation. When you
Yeah.
learn to satisfy your deep-seated human need for wonder, for movement, for sensory stimulation, for connection, using the free, abundant resources of the outside world, you automatically reduce the internal psychological pressure to fill that emptiness with purchasable goods and services. This final step, spending time outside, it's not really presented as just another budgetary suggestion. It's positioned as the ultimate philosophical practice of intentional living. It's the capstone, perhaps, of truly mastering the desire to acquire.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really powerful, pretty expansive deep dive, actually. We've journeyed all the way from the basic mechanics of defining financial waste right into the implied philosophy of managing fundamental human desire. So let's try to synthesize. What does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to put this into practice?
Well, the sources, taken together, they define this clear, I think, quite sophisticated and definitely actionable path. A path away from the inertia, the automatic pilot of mindless consumption, and towards genuine, conscious, intentional living. And this journey, it really requires us first to be brutally honest with our diagnoses, to really look at our spending and define, is this pure waste? Or is it excessive waste? And then critically, to summon the courage to delve deep into the why. Why am I actually doing this? What's the root cause of these destructive or unsatisfying habits? And then it's about implementing those structural proactive solutions we talked about. Things like batch cooking to solve the problem of evening tiredness or using detailed lists to solve the problem of in-store distraction. These structural changes remove that constant draining reliance on fickle, finite willpower.
And it's also fundamentally about becoming the master of your own mental environment, isn't it? This involves consciously defining your values and then encoding them through those pre-committed, self-imposed rules, your personal legislation, and then applying specific tactical tools like that incredibly effective 48-hour rule to actively neutralize impulse buys in the moment. It's really about choosing to be an agent in your own life, guided by deliberate choices that align with your values, rather than just being passively steered by external marketing pressures or those fleeting temporary dopamine hits from clicking buy now.
Absolutely. The 10 steps we explored, when you look at them collectively, they really are a practical modern application of ancient Stoic principles of self-restraint and focusing on what's truly within your control, your judgments, your desires, your actions. By deliberately limiting quantity, we find we actually increase appreciation. By defining the precise moment where excess begins for us personally, we learn to prioritize quality over sheer volume. And by finding genuine contentment in non-transactional forms of fulfillment, like spending time in nature, we address the very root cause of so many consumer cravings. The framework makes the central argument unmistakable. True wealth, lasting contentment, it's ultimately found in the mastery of the desire to acquire, not just in the endless act of acquisition itself. You gain financial freedom largely by learning to regulate your own internal state.
Okay, so we started this deep dive way back at the beginning by defining pure waste, buying something that is ultimately never used. The ultimate indicator, perhaps, of a purchase made by your hopeful, aspirational self, but then abandoned by your actual, everyday self. So as you continue with your day after listening to this, I want you to really internalize that concept. Take a moment, maybe later today, and think back honestly over the last few months. Consider the things you've purchased, large or small. Can you identify one item that clearly represents your most significant piece of pure waste? And then, here's the crucial part. What deeper root cause, what was the true why behind that purchase did buying that thing allow you to temporarily ignore or distract yourself from successfully addressing? Was it really about tiredness? Was it boredom? Was it seeking status or external validation? Was it stress? Answering that question honestly for yourself, identifying your pure waste and its real root cause, that is the real deep dive for you to start today.
Welcome to The Debate. Today we're diving into, well, one of the most practical but also quite profound philosophical issues that comes up in the material on intentional living. How do we actually master that relentless desire to acquire things and, cut down on waste?
Yeah, it's a big one. And I think the central question that anyone trying this really faces is this. When you're looking for change that actually lasts, is the main driver putting in place these external structural rules and limits? Or is it more about focusing internally on the, let's say, philosophical root cause analysis and substitution?
And I'm firmly advocating for the power of structure here. I really believe that specific, measurable tactics, things like the 48-hour rule, setting unbreakable spending limits, mandatory planning, these are the essential guardrails, you could say, that build the discipline we need to conquer impulse.
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. While those guardrails are definitely useful tools, I don't think they're the engine of change. For me, lasting freedom from consumption, it depends crucially on figuring out the root cause behind the spending. Often, it's an underlying lack of contentment, and then actively substituting that void with enriching activities that don't involve spending, like, engaging with nature. Just focusing on external rules feels a bit like treating the symptom, not the core behavioral illness.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective on why that self-imposed structure is, I think, the most reliable starting point. The material gives us a framework for mechanical control, precisely because impulse is often a mechanical, almost dopamine-fueled reaction. First, we have to define the problem clearly, right? And the material does this by categorizing waste. You've got pure waste, that's the non-essential purchase, the thing you bought and never used, which you can easily track if you look at expense reports. Then there's excessive waste, which is different. It's the habit you do so often it loses its value and just becomes this mindless financial drain, like, say, eating out 4 nights in a row. Now, these definitions, they immediately demand structural countermeasures. The 48-hour rule is a perfect example. It's a tangible tool designed specifically to combat that pure waste. It forces patience, right? It acts as a direct, almost institutionalized weapon against that impulsive rush. It delays the gratification long enough for, well, the rational part of your brain to kick back in, turning a potential transaction from just an emotional reaction into a considered decision. And furthermore, implementing these unbreakable rules, things like never spend money online after 8 p.m., or maybe only buy new clothes 4 times a year, it allows the individual to become, as the material puts it, the legislator of their own behavior. These clear, quantifiable boundaries are basically how you operationalize something like Stoic restraint in our consumer society. It's self-discipline made manifest, made real.
That's a compelling argument for discipline through metrics. I'll give you that. But you seem to frame structure as the primary lever. I tend to view it as, well, necessary, sure, but ultimately insufficient on its own. If you focus only on rules, you risk creating this restriction mindset, this feeling of being deprived, which frankly is fragile. It's prone to collapse eventually. It's not the same as sustainable self-discipline that's born from genuine contentment. The material strongly suggests, I think, that the core of intentional living is really about addressing the why behind the consumption. You have to find the root cause and the solution. If excessive spending is driven by, say, a lack of time, like you mentioned, eating out every day because you're too tired to cook, the long-term rational solution isn't just imposing some arbitrary limit on restaurant visits. The real solution is finding the systemic fix, like maybe batch cooking meals on a Sunday. If the excess spending is tied to boredom, well, simply delaying a purchase by 48 hours doesn't actually eliminate that underlying void, does it? The desire is still there, untouched. And crucially, the material points to boredom as this great philosophical antagonist. Idle time indoors, it suggests, creates a vacuum that gets filled by consumer cravings. The sustainable remedy offered isn't another rule, it's substitution for contentment. Spending time outside, walking in nature, which apparently restores contentment and helps detach us from that constant pursuit of acquisition. This shift ensures you're mastering the desire to acquire, which the material implies is the true essence of wealth, rather than just managing transactions until inevitably the rules break.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit. This idea of immediate management versus a systemic overhaul. Let's take our first key point. Which method is actually the most effective defense against excessive waste? You noted eating out too often might be a symptom of tiredness. And while batch cooking addresses that root cause, I still maintain that set limits on habits is the superior defense for the excessive waste itself. Think about it. The habit of eating out loses its value precisely because it happens too often. A structural limit, let's say, eat out no more than 3 times a week, is a clear, non-negotiable boundary. It ensures the habit is contained, it preserves its enjoyment and value, frankly, and it provides an immediate financial cap. It stops that slow, insidious drain of resources. The rule is immediate, it's reliable, regardless of whether you actually manage to batch cook that week or not. It's the fail-safe.
I understand the appeal of the fail-safe, I really do. But I just don't buy that simply imposing a number solves the fundamental issue of inefficiency that often underlies excessive waste. Let's stick with food, but maybe shift to groceries. Say I habitually overbuy fresh produce that just spoils before I can use it. Imposing a strict, say, $100 weekly grocery limit doesn't actually solve the waste. It might just mean I buy cheaper stuff, maybe less healthy substitutes, until I hit the cap. But I could still end up wasting food and money. Or it forces me to buy tiny amounts sporadically, which is also inefficient. Excessive waste, as I see it, is often a symptom of lacking a proper system, lacking foresight. The fundamental fix comes from root cause analysis. Realizing, okay, I waste food because I don't meal plan, or maybe my pantry isn't stocked effectively. The solution then is implementing a structural system, like making a disciplined shopping list based on planned meals and, crucially, sticking to it rigidly. That list, yes, it's a tool of discipline, but it's born from the analysis of the waste. That makes it a more fundamental long-term fix, I think, than just slapping an arbitrary numerical boundary on it, which you might hit through inefficient methods anyway.
Okay, fair enough. I acknowledge that for issues like systematic resource management, like inventory control in your pantry example, analysis definitely dictates the structure you need. But let's shift back to the domain of impulse, where I think structural rules really shine. This brings us to the efficacy of the 48-hour rule versus the value of finding fulfillment in nature. The 48-hour rule is a direct, active intervention against pure waste. It institutionalizes rational self-discipline exactly when that dopamine hit is highest. It's immediate, it's defensive, and it's proven to work for many. I mean, picture this. You're standing in a store aisle right now looking at some beautiful, completely unnecessary new kitchen gadget. What protects you in that moment? It's probably not the internal memory of a peaceful walk you took last Tuesday. It's the institutionalized reflex of the rule you set for yourself. I must wait 2 days. That's the practical barrier.
The 48-hour rule is undeniably useful for delaying transactions. I agree. It's an excellent mechanism for preventing the accidental purchase. However, I still think it treats the fever, not the infection. The truly insidious ongoing driver of consumption often is boredom, that emotional void we talked about. If that void remains, if the individual is still fundamentally seeking stimulation and excitement through consumption, the impulse doesn't just vanish. It probably just resurfaces in 49 hours. Or worse, it gets redirected to another equally frivolous purchase. We haven't really achieved intentional living if we're just postponing the inevitable transaction, have we? True mastery, I believe, requires the substitution of a destructive habit, like shopping for novelty, with an enriching one that costs nothing, like that connection to the natural world. Going outside, as the material suggests, restores contentment at a foundational level.
It detaches the mind from the craving apparatus entirely, ideally. The individual stops desiring the gadget because their source of fulfillment is now completely external to their wallet. You just can't achieve that level of detachment with a mere waiting period.
I'm not convinced that focusing purely on internal contentment is robust enough to combat the sheer velocity and sophistication of modern consumer temptation. The pursuit of contentment by nature feels perhaps a bit too passive, too indirect when you're faced with targeted advertising and immediate one-click gratification online. Temptation is aggressive, it's immediate, and while the philosophical outcome of contentment is absolutely the ultimate goal, the 48-hour rule is an active, defensive strategy that creates the necessary psychological space in that critical moment. We have to use the structural tool to manage the high-stakes moment of temptation. If we only rely on a deep sense of internal peace derived from, a distant memory of the woods, we risk failing repeatedly right when the pressure is highest. The rule is the anchor, you see. The contentment might be the compass, but the anchor has to hold against the storm first.
That's an interesting point, the anchor analogy. But it assumes the rule is the only reliable defense. I'd argue that focusing so heavily on external rules risks missing the point that we're trying to master the desire itself. If someone is perpetually bored and just seeking temporary fixes through consumption, the rules become frustrating. They can lead to burnout. I've seen this pattern, people following the list perfectly, adhering to the limits, but still feeling that nagging pull toward the expensive purchase. That's a clear signal the problem isn't the transaction itself, it's the inherent lack of fulfillment driving it. Finding contentment through nature or other non-spending activities, it isn't passive, it's a profound active substitution of value. It shifts the entire basis of fulfillment away from acquisition. Ideally, it makes the waiting period irrelevant because the desire itself has significantly faded. That shift, that internal change, feels like the ultimate goal of intentional living to me.
Okay, this brings us perfectly to our third contention then. How do we define Stoic restraint in the context of modern consumerism? We both agree restraint is necessary, but how is it best implemented? I argue that Stoic restraint is best operationalized through these specific, unbreakable rules that create internal structure. The material clearly states that by setting these rules, you turn the consumer into the legislator of your own behavior. This structure is, I believe, the most reliable, practical way to achieve intentional living because it provides predictable, disciplined outcomes. It creates habit patterns that over time actually require less mental energy to maintain.
Right, and intellectual disagreement sharpens understanding, doesn't it? Here's where our interpretations seem to diverge most clearly. While structure definitely aids discipline, Stoic restraint for me is fundamentally about internal mastery and understanding sufficiency. True wealth, according to this kind of philosophy, comes from mastering the desire to acquire, not just managing the flow of goods you already permit yourself to buy based on a rule. If we look back at excessive waste, that habit done until it loses value, the remedy isn't just setting a number. It's the internal reflection needed to recognize that the habit has become valueless in the first place. That self-awareness, asking why, is arguably far more taxing and more crucial than simply sticking to an external schedule.
If I set a rule that I can eat out 3 times a week, but I still feel unhappy or drained on those 3 nights because I haven't solved the underlying issue of tiredness, well, I haven't mastered the desire. I've only organized my unhappiness, haven't I? So the focus must be on cultivating that non-material fulfillment first, so that when you do set a rule, it's coming from a place of sufficiency, not just restriction.
I absolutely agree that analysis is essential for identifying the waste categories and diagnosing the root cause initially. You must know why you're overconsuming. But once that diagnosis is made, I maintain that structure has to take over to enforce the cure. The analysis reveals the deficit, yes, but the rules are the practical solution that creates genuine, repeatable self-discipline. A written shopping list, for example, it's not just a tool. The material explicitly calls it a manifestation of discipline. And it's that discipline, built through repeatable structural actions, that ultimately frees the individual from mindlessness, allowing the internal contentment you champion to actually flourish within a structured environment.
A list is critical, I won't argue that, but its effectiveness depends entirely on the intention with which you enter the store, doesn't it? The material makes it clear you have to shop with purpose. You enter with a clear intention and avoid just wandering around, which it says feeds desire. If that internal purpose, that conscious rejection of impulse, is lacking, the list just becomes a burden you fight against, not a tool of freedom you utilize. Intentional living fundamentally requires that internal commitment and philosophical buy-in first, I think. The structure supports it, but doesn't create it.
Well, intentional living is the opposite of mindless consumption. And the most reliable path I see to ending mindlessness is through highly specific structural enforcement and tangible limits.
And I'd say the path to sustainable, long-term intentional living is rooted in understanding the emotional and philosophical reasons why we consume in the first place, and then actively substituting that consumption with sources of contentment that cost nothing.
So, to reiterate my position, practical structural steps, setting rules, establishing clear limits, using planning tools like lists, they provide the most immediate and reliable method for shifting away from mindless consumption. They build the concrete self-discipline necessary for intentional living. establishing those crucial moral guardrails that hold firm when temptation strikes.
And I'll conclude by saying that while those guardrails certainly serve an important function, particularly in the short term, sustainable freedom really requires answering that deeper why. Focusing on root cause analysis, cultivating non-material contentment, and engaging in activities that cost nothing, yet enrich everything. That, I believe, is the ultimate path to mastering desire and achieving a form of wealth that isn't measured by what you acquire.
We have certainly rigorously explored how internal motivation and external structure, both drawn from the material, can work together, or sometimes perhaps against each other, in the effort to master spending impulses. Thank you for illuminating these two quite powerful strategies.
An excellent exchange as always. It definitely highlights the complexity of the issue.